Whales keep dying off the coast of the United States, and it just so happens the reason they're dying is all of these ridiculous, unsightly, and apparently killer windmills that are just off the coast. It's got a lot of local Americans within eyesight of the dead whales and the windmills concerned. Yet it doesn't seem to have any of the traditional environmental groups concerned. They've gone kind of amazingly silent on the issue. Let's bring in Daniel Kish now. He's a senior fellow at the Institute for Energy Research, and he joins us on the phone. Daniel, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Vince.
What is going on with all of these dead whales washing up? What's the explanation here?
Well, the government's telling us that there's nothing going on, but they haven't done any research, and now they're saying we need to do some research. But ultimately, the people along the coast will tell you, and I think there are about 20 mayors in coastal towns up and down around New Jersey and other areas that have seen big dead whales on the beach, that
Yes.
Something's wrong. And they're out there sending seismic and laying these things out. And there's a mad rush because the government's pouring billions of dollars into subsidies for this stuff. And so every foreign company out there is lining up because most of these companies are foreign. And it's kind of hard to hide a dead whale.
Yeah, very hard. The timeline here is interesting. If you were looking for an honest answer as to how these whales are dying, you might look at this evidence. In 2016, that's the year when the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said that there were beginning to be unusual mortality events for humpback and North Atlantic right whales, which started, of course, washing up on the shores there near New Jersey, Long Island. That happened to be the same year in which wind development began off of the East Coast. Those two, it seems like it's worth connecting some dots there, no?
Oh, yeah. I mean, since December of last year, 60 whales have washed up on the beaches along the coast. In fact, it's gotten to such a point. Actually, Michael Schellenberger just released a movie called Thrown to the Wind, which addresses this and talks to experts up and down the coast about just exactly what's happening in their backyards. And I it kind of makes me wonder, these are right whales, I think you said.
Yes.
If they were left whales, do you think the Biden administration would be doing something to try to save them?
They'd charge those windmills with a hate crime right away. So let me understand something, though. It used to be kind of a staple of the environmental left that you stand up for the whales. How much standing up for the whales are the traditional environmental groups doing right now?
Oh, none. Absolutely none. They're more interested in pushing offshore wind because offshore wind costs 3 times as much to build and to deploy as onshore wind and natural gas plants. So this is very expensive electricity, and even at those rates, some of these companies have canceled and gone back on their contracts and said, we're not going to build this if you're only going to pay us 3 times as much. We want more. There have been cancellations off of Massachusetts, one off of Rhode Island. Over in the UK, a huge plant that was scheduled to be deployed over there has been shut down. So what we're talking about, anybody who's ever followed the green movement in the United States kind of recognizes that essentially they understand the capitalist system very well, and what they try to do is make stuff more expensive so we'll use less. And that same thing goes for electricity. So what we're talking about is very expensive electricity and a bunch of dead whales washing up on the beaches, and they're nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. Yet they used to be. So organizations like the Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, Greenpeace, they're all big backers of putting windmills up in the ocean, but they don't have anything these days to say about the whales that seem to be dying as a result of those projects.
Right. I mean, Greenpeace used to attack whaling ships and far-flung parts of the world. That's how they got their name, by ramming whaling ships the Japanese had and all the rest. You don't see them ramming into windmills. Of course, there aren't any windmills. This is very nascent in the United States. We've only got one small offshore wind project so far off of Rhode Island in a very peculiar place. But at any rate, what we're talking about here is a double standard, a double sense of justice when it comes to whales, who get all the attention. And actually, when it comes to oil and gas development, down in the Gulf of Mexico, the Interior Department just pulled back a sail, made it much smaller because they're worried about something called the rice whale down there. But we've got generations of experience and no conclusion ever that whales are affected in the Gulf of Mexico because of oil and gas operations.
Why? So let me just ask you a question about the oil companies now, because you have some of these oil companies are actually the investors in some of these wind projects. What is inducing them in order to put money into this failing, murderous technology?
Yeah, they tend to be foreign companies whose governments in Europe are heavily invested in green energy, and who, for whatever reason, they're destroying their economies over there. Germany's deindustrializing, and other people can't afford to keep their plants open anymore that make things. But that's part of it. The other part is huge amounts of subsidies. I mean, Goldman Sachs says that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which they now admit is a climate bill,
right,
the Green New Deal in essence, will cost $1.2 trillion, 3 times as much as it was billed at the time when CBO scored it. So that kind of money is kind of hard to pass up.
For sure. So the summary here is that the whale deaths will probably continue because there's no appetite among these lefty organizations and the media that represents their talking points to discuss what has become a real problem for a number of communities in the Northeast.
Yes, exactly. And they're nowhere to be found. Normally they'd be standing up and screaming at the top of their lungs and lawsuits and you name it.
Yeah.
And instead, they're cheering it on.
Well, that's because they know why this is happening. I mean, that kind of gives it away, doesn't it? If you're not going to speak up for the whales, then that tells me that all of these lefty groups suspect that it is the windmills that are killing them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Because they can make money otherwise. They could just be like, look at all the whale death. It's probably climate change. No, they know better. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time today, sir. Daniel Kish.